Hello again. I promised 2 videos today, and part of the reason why I promised 2 videos today is because I was reviewing SKT versus Ku Tigers final in 2015 and some of the cool lane swaps that they had there, and it made me really miss lane swaps. So I wanted to talk more about lane swaps, which is why I'm doing it. If you've kept up with my written content at all, you're probably not surprised that I miss lane swaps. When Riot announced that they were going to remove lane swaps, I published a long 2-part article about how what they were saying and the assumptions they made were not really accurate. Their lane swap wasn't really the default strategy, and it wasn't formulaic because there were all sorts of factors and cool nuances that went into lane swaps. I was reminded of that pretty vaguely when I went over the Ku versus SKT series, and I mentioned a lot of those little factors, so you can go ahead and watch that video, or you can read the article that I did before if you're really interested, and I won't bore you too much. One of the assumptions that they made kind of came through with Mark Reynolds' weird rants to Reginald about how it's going to emphasize the individual skill of players more. I was really skeptical of this assertion because my initial gut reaction would be that it would just instead emphasize picking strong champions and having strong lane matchups, and that kind of ended up being a big factor, but there were other things that happened that got involved as well. For example, and this is something that could have been predicted from watching the LPL where they had really low rates of lane swaps anyway, Blue side became really strong at the World Championship. There was something like a 60% win rate of Blue side in the World Championship, and I will kind of go over very briefly why that was the case right now. First of all, I'm using RiftKit map.riftkit.net to talk about this factor. Really nice tool, kind of fun. The reason why Blue side ended up being so strong at the 2016 World Championship in standard lane scenarios is because it really emphasized having a push on the blue side and being able to manipulate terrain. And this isn't something that I just theorized about, which I theorized about watching LPL games, but it's something that was kind of confirmed to me when I interviewed players there, specifically MLXG, who talked about this. So what happens on blue side is if you're able to push out and get control of the lane like this with your bot lane, it's really easy for the support to invade and place wards and place vision in this area. For example, following this information, very often it's easy for the jungler to set up bot lane dives, assuming you're still pushed, going in this area and really punish the bot lane here. Because there are a lot of people on the bot side of the map, you can get 2 kills off of this snowball really efficiently and also get the bot lane turret, because bot lane turret has lower armor, etc, and you get first brick gold, so it just kind of exacerbated this factor that was still there. That ended up being a 60% win rate in the group stage of the World Championship for blue side. And it really emphasized the existence of the 2v2 matchup, things like this. However, I'm going to not be all doom and gloom and say that there were definitely strategies that counteracted this. One strategy used by SK Telecom involved the 2v2 of the jungle and mid. Okay, what they did was they would have stronger priority on having mid pushed out. That way, they could use mid and jungle 2v2 to win this fight over Raptor camp, deny the ability of the enemy jungler to have an oracles, and that would allow them to have the river completely clear, basically a vision here, which makes it a lot harder for the enemy team to set up a dive even if they have bot side control, just by denying this oracle buff from the enemy. So that made them much stronger on red side, but it also put a lot of onus for them to be able to do that on red side. With changes to patches, things change a lot more as well. For example, the increased experience on the Krugs and the red made it a lot easier for blue side jungler to get these two, go dive bot, and then it snowball from there. Obviously, the counter strategy is farming all these camps, but still, then that jungler just has to be so much more effective with the extra gold than having the 2 kills in the bot lane early on. Other factors that might change now that Riot has said that they will fix the Krugs problem is that there's an issue with the terrain, and part of the reason why, again, it's so easy to set up this dive on blue side is that this terrain blocking here is much less obtrusive than this terrain blocking here. Something I saw in a Spanish League game, because the European National Leagues have been playing on new patches, which is pretty cool, is they use Blasting Cone. It came from red side. And he used Blasting Cone to get over this terrain and set up a dive. So that was pretty cool, but because of the intermittent spawns of Blasting Cone, and because of how rare it is for Blasting Cone to spawn, that can be a little bit difficult. Either way, all of this is to say that there is a lot of emphasis placed on being able to push bot, or being able to push mid, or having pushing lanes in somewhere. Like if you can push top, that's also really effective because you can use your TP more effectively without losing minions, things like this. So all of this depends on having pushing lanes. You would think then that, oh yes, it does emphasize individual skill, because if you have pushing lanes, that means you're winning, that means your player's better. This isn't really the case. When I did an interview with Forgiven, he said that 50% or more, which to me suggests that, you know, at minimum it's 50-50, but it's probably more likely the winning matchup is winning the bot lane. And I think the exceptions were because he's Forgiven, you know, he doesn't feel like he's reliant on this type of thing, and that he's like this really standout player that proves the rule. But in general, what you see is that there's just this huge emphasis on having pushing lanes and champions that push well into the enemy and can push back the enemy champion. So this, instead of putting emphasis on having really strong individually skilled players, puts a lot of emphasis on having a really good drafting coach, okay? So this is something that's going to be huge, is having a coach that can draft strong matchups in multiple lanes and get you a strong jungler, because you want your jungler to be able to farm a full side camp, not be afraid of invade, especially with the longer spawn times on jungle camps. So this is going to be a huge factor, and again, you're not emphasizing individual skill, you're emphasizing, can we get push lanes? Can we get invade here? All of these strategic concepts that are not immediately translatable to the screen, just like lane swaps without explanation. You're going to still need to explain these concepts to people. It's still going to be complex, and you've just made it even less intuitive by making the armor on the turrets less and then the armor on the other turrets more. So for me, I feel like overall the idea of making games look like your solo queue games or emphasizing individual player skill hasn't panned out, and nothing has really shown that it's panned out, and all these concepts that I explained weren't immediately intuitive either, in explaining like, why is Blindside winning so much? Why is it easier to dive bottom? Why are you getting all of these advantages, etc., etc.? Still, difficult concepts to explain. So I think that removing lane swaps is still a little bit sad for me. It did decrease champion diversity. We saw fewer champions played at this World Championship than either of the past two World Championships. And it just puts more emphasis on one particular thing, which is coaching, in particular drafting coaching and picking the right champions, which will probably be even more exacerbated by changes to pick ban that are theorized to happen, or may theoretically happen, with increased number of bans, etc., etc. So, anyway, thank you for watching. I didn't mean for this to be like an angry rant. I just miss lane swaps, and I wanted to follow up on all of the articles that I made beforehand, where I talked about how I didn't actually think that changing the lane swaps would necessarily accomplish what Riot wanted, and I still feel like it hasn't. Maybe we'll have a good 2017, and that will be completely wrong, and people will find ways to get around this, and the game will be incredibly interesting still, so I am looking forward to it.